Dr. Turrisi, you may begin.
Thank you. First off, I want to thank everybody for taking time out to join us today. This is something that's a little different for all of us here. We're not used to doing this, and it's a little different for me because I'm used to talking in front of a larger audience, and I don't really know who's in the audience. So I'm talking to my computer, actually, at this point, knowing there are people out there that are tuning in. So I'll try and get right to the point. I was asked by my friends and colleagues at MAD to give two of these webinar meetings, and one of them was supposed to be on coping with stress, and the other one's going to be talking on substance use related issues. And we had them switch so that we were going to talk about substance use first, and then we were going to talk about coping second. And I felt like with the time that we're going through right now, which is considered to be very different than our normal life, I thought, let's deal with coping with stress first, just like we've done with like helping parents improve their communication skills or different parenting practices before we get to the topics of substance misuse next week. So here we are today. And I've been talking to a lot of different families for the last several weeks. Initially, I was out on the road, and then like everybody else, my travel kind of to a screeching halt, and now I'm doing what most people are, which is staying at home, doing my best to try and flatten the curve. So there's a number of different things I want to talk about that have changed in our lives. As we all know, what's normal today is not what was normal a month ago. And for many of you parents, you're taking on multiple roles, so you probably might be working remotely. You might be having two parents in the home who are working remotely. You might have two parents or one or two parents who are temporarily laid off or lost their jobs as a result of store closures, business closures, and so on. So the dynamic that exists in our homes is very different right now. The second place where there's kind of a difference that we're all experiencing is that we have our children now at home 24/7 as opposed to going to school every day and attending the activities they do. So as parents, our roles have again changed so that we're also teachers. And so on top of everything else that's going on, we're doing this. So I want to start after I kind of said a little recap on everything that we're going on, is that no matter how organized and calm you might be on a daily basis, it's nearly impossible to not feel anxious on a daily basis right now. So I want to point out that that's completely normal. And there's going to be times where maybe every day where we don't feel like we're handling things very well. So I just wanted to kind of normalize a little bit of that and just say that, as a professional, my job is to not only help other people, but to clearly manage my own emotions and anxiety. And I just want to say it becomes a task to do that. So the first things I want to do is I want to talk about balance and to try to give you some suggestions that might be helpful for you as far as trying to balance some of these things. The one thing that I've noticed that I've been trying to talk to parents about is this idea that we want to pay attention to what's going on in our country, in our states, and our communities. But we have to balance it to some extent. So it's important that we pay attention to things and we learn new developments. But what's really valuable that we recognize, we kind of need some quiet time. And one of the recommendations I've had is that, we talk about COVID, we talk about how it's affected our lives, we do those types of things, but then pick a time in your home where you say, okay, from this point forward, we're going to be sensitive to it because friends, loved ones, people we know might be suffering from this or may have even passed away from this. We're not being insensitive to that, but we don't want it to control every minute of our lives. So in our home, we've decided that at 7 o'clock at night, we're done. We're not going to talk about COVID. We're not going to reference it. If somebody calls us on the phone, we might have to have a conversation about it. But ultimately, we're going to try and say from 7 o'clock on, we're not going to do that. And what that does is it gives everybody knowing that that's going to happen an opportunity for us to focus in on other things and other aspects of our lives that are not related to COVID right now. And so 7 o'clock is our tune-off time. We just go, okay, from this point on, we're not watching the news. We're not talking about this. We're gonna go back to, you know, the life way it was about a month ago, even though we're quarantined. So we're gonna still go to life the way it was about a month ago. So that might involve reading, it might involve watching Netflix or a show, it might involve having conversations with people, but we know that it's a time. For some families with younger children, you might want to bump that up a little earlier. And it could be, you know, by the time dinner's ready. Okay, dinner time now is the time where we have a 5 minute, 10 minute, we talk about our feelings, how the day's going, what's going on. But then at that point on, we kind of put a close stop on it. We've been doing that for about 9, 10 days now. And we've gotten, you know, the first couple of days is a little harder because we'd slip back into it. But then we figured out that that's important. So one of the ways to cope with stress in this way is to give yourself the opportunity to communicate about it, and also to give yourself the opportunity to not have to have it be an important part of your daily existence. From what we know about coping with stress is that there are two different, you know, there's a lot of different approaches to coping, but if you want to boil it down to sort of a more simple way to handle it, if something is a short-term stressor, and it's likely to go away, then you could do some avoidant type behaviors and kind of distract yourself from doing it because it's going to go away. If it's a long-term stressor and you know it's not going to go away, then you have to kind of deal with it in certain ways. This particular instance, it's a little bit in between. We have aspects of it that are short-term. So for example, we're going to go back to work. We're going to be able to do things like that. The aspect of it that's not exactly short-term is we're not exactly sure when that will happen. So in that way, there's an advantage to doing some distraction-related behaviors, and that's like what I suggested before, which is having a time of the day where in your family you kind of shut down on that, you know, anything related to this, and you go back to your normal existence. And then there's the part to deal with it. And so one of the things that I've heard from families are that depending upon your children and what ages they have different concerns about it. So I want to talk about one thing that's sort of global for all age children. And the first thing is that they clearly do respond to the way we behave. So if we talk about this with hope, with that there's an opportunity to change, that we know it's going to change and things are going to go back to a reasonable way of life, then they'll also have that kind of hope. But if we talk about it as though this is a concern, it's not going to go away, it's never going to happen, it's not going to get fixed, then they're going to pick up on that as well. So kids are going to feed off of the different emotions that we have, which is why it's important for us, and I know that our kids are feeling some stress, it's important for us to take care of the things that we need to take care of for us to be at our best. So again, one of the things I have is I say, have a time at which you shut that off. You shut that switch off and say, okay, we're going to go, we're not going to talk about this. Another thing that is we all need to be able to take a couple of deep breaths. And I know that sounds kind of silly and ridiculous, but there's actually scientific data that shows that deep breathing is related to as a really ideal stress reducer. And so it's really good for our family to come together and communicate. And I've written a lot of materials on communication that are being used all over the country, including Man's Power of Parents for high schoolers and middle schoolers. In this case, we also need our own time. We need a little quiet time to process things. And that quiet time, it could be that you know, go in your own bedrooms and read a book. Excuse me, I have a dog behind us. It could be that you go into your bedrooms and read a book, or it could be that you go and you play a game, you do something quietly on your own, and then you go back, and everybody should have that. So for me, the combination of together time, but also that being mindful about having some distance is good, because parents need a little quiet time too. They need a chance to catch their breath and put their feet up and sit down. The one thing that we've learned from this is that things can slow down really quickly without us having the ability to adjust to them that way. The next is that our kids are, as smart as they are, as warm as they are, as loving as they are, they're going through these changes right now. I was talking to a teenager at a grocery store, and she had a line that I think I'm going to share with you, and she'll be happy that I did. And the line is, we're making tomorrow's history today in the way we act and we behave. And so that's really important to recognize that kids are processing this and they're thinking about this. But right now, they are still developing. In the areas that they're developing emotionally, they're developing physically, they're developing socially. They're having all these stages of development, even though we're going through this. They're still operating this way. And so as parents, it's a big, important part of our lives, our roles, is to recognize that these changes are taking place. So they're going to change the way we think, they're going to change the way they feel, they're going to change the way they interact with people, they're going to change how they respond to the news. And they're not just small versions of adults. Their brains are actually very different. They're much more focused on emotions and what's happening now. And so their perspective on what the future is still going to be what's happening today, what's happening tomorrow, what's happening over the weekend, when are we going to go back to our own lives? And so their perspectives on things are going to be very different than the adult that thinks, oh, this might be, we might go back to our lives in May. We might go back to our lives at the end of April or June or something along those lines. We've lived longer, we experience it. Our brains are structurally different. So it's really important to think that way. The next thing is it's important for parents to take time, even though their roles have changed and they have so many more things that are being asked of them. Make sure you take time to ask each of your kids how they're doing. How are they feeling? Now, most of the time they're going to start by saying, I'm good, everything's fine, or how am I supposed to feel? I can't get to see any of my friends, I can't do any of the things I do, how do I feel? I feel like that. So I think the best thing to do is to try and when I say best thing, there are different ways in your home that you might do this. We've done a strategy where we play Ask Me Anything You Want. And it's a game where you take turns asking questions about what you want to do. And the questions sometimes start off as, well, what's your favorite song? Or what's your favorite this? Or what's your favorite that? But then after a while, they open up into more deep conversations. And the point is not to just answer these questions, but to be able to ask questions. When it's your turn to ask questions, the thing that we encourage is that you start your questions off with how, what, and why. And the Power Parents Middle School materials talks a lot about that. But you could start by saying, what are some of the things that you're looking forward to when this is over? How might you go about handling that when you have to go back and adjust? What are some of the things you might do initially? Why would you do that instead of this? And those how, what, and why questions allow them to talk about things other than yeses and nos. So we want to stay away from questions that get simple answers or grunts and go to how, what, and why type questions. The last thing that I wanted to cover today is that I want to reinforce what I started with, that we all are going to have our moments where we're going to be either anxious or emotional about things. And it's really important, I reinforce this, that we do things that calm ourselves down, bring us some degree of pleasure or joy so that we can share some of that. Because again, there's a lot of information about parenting. I've written about it, but nowhere do we say it's the best opportunity to parent where you're emotionally unhappy. That's usually not the best case for good results. And with that, again, I want to thank you for all your time. Next week when I come, I'll be talking about alcohol use. I'll be talking about marijuana use. And I might be talking also about combining alcohol and marijuana and nicotine too. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to talk with all of you, and I'll see you in a week.